After our week in Da Nang, we took a car service 2.5 hours north to Hue, the former imperial capital and current cultural capital of Vietnam. We stayed near the old city in the densely built Phui Hoi neighborhood. On a quiet, narrow street just off the main roads. The fourth largest city in Vietnam, Hue's traffic was very mild compared to every other city we visited, though the Vietnamese way of street crossing is always a bit crazy. There were some small temples in the area, including one with a Lady Buddha, the Vietnamese Dao Mao mother goddess. The Perfume River separates old and new Hue, and the right bank has some French-era colonial buildings and a beautiful lotus flower-shaped restaurant. At night, the city gets very colorful, and large sections of our neighborhood convert to walking streets, popular with locals and tourists. The Truong Tien Bridge, built by the French Eiffel Company and opened in 1900, puts on a multicolored show over the Perfume River. The Nguyen dynasty ruled Vietnam over 140 years from their capital at Hue. The area is full of imperial history to explore, and we began a private day tour purchased at our hotel by catching a ride down the Perfume River on one of the many dragon boats that are tied up at the river port. We were the only passengers on the boat, but not the only tour boat on the river. The Nguyen clan originated from the region, so when they took power, the capital was moved here from what is now Hanoi. And they built their palace facing the river. The river is still important today for recreation, fishing, and industry. We disembarked about 5 kilometers upstream from the Imperial Palace at the Dien Mu Temple. Famous for its iconic 7-story pagoda, it was built in 1601 by the Nguyen lords, then regional rulers, 200 years before they controlled the Vietnamese Empire. The site was chosen because of a local legend. An old woman, Dien Mu, literally heavenly lady, supposedly appeared on this hilltop and predicted the importance before disappearing. The beautiful grounds have been expanded over the years, maintained by the resident monks, as it's an active monastery in addition to a tourist attraction. In 1963, one of the temple's monks, Thich Quang Duc, was driven to Saigon in this car, where he self-immolated in protest of the South Vietnamese government's anti-Buddhist discriminatory practices. He is now venerated, and his heart is kept here as a relic. But that period in history will be covered more in a future video. Our tour continued upriver, but we went by car from here. The tomb complex of Emperor Minh Mang lies set back from the Hu Troc River, near where it joins the Ta Troc River to form the Perfume. Minh Mang was the second Nguyen emperor, ruling from 1820 to 1839. His reign was tumultuous. There were over 200 rebellions in 20 years. Domestically, he centralized imperial power while fighting wars with neighbor countries and dealing with a cholera pandemic that had spread from India. Minh Mang also had to deal with increasing French colonial efforts. Interested in Vietnam since the mid-17th century to secure trade in Hoi An, the French increasingly saw it as strategic territory to compete against the Spanish Philippines and British India and Malaya. Minh Mang's response was isolationism, severely restricting European trade, banning Christian missionaries, and executing 7 who were caught violating that ban. There are 7 known royal tombs around Hue. 3 are available through this 2-day pass. The structure of Minh Mang's is straight, austere, and orderly, the way he attempted to run his empire. Many of the temples and buildings inside the complex were where his concubines and servants lived out their lives after his death. His actual tomb is isolated by a lake, a circular wall, and locked door. Like his isolationist policies that would, ironically, weaken Vietnam by falling technologically behind the Europeans he was attempting to keep out. The other mausoleum that we visited was of Emperor Chiu Juk, the longest ruling Nguyen monarch. He reigned from 1848 to 1883, continuing his predecessor's policies of isolationism and suppression of Christian missionaries. 1 year after he took the throne, another cholera pandemic hit the country, and 10 years into his reign, the French attacked southern Vietnam, and by 1862 had their first colonial foothold in the region. And most of this complex was built from 1864 to 1867, that the emperor used as a regular retreat for the rest of his life. An artist and poet, Chiu Juk's mausoleum has large forested areas, and walkways, bridges, and pavilions that border the extensive lakes. Even though it was built in the 19th century, it looks like it belongs to an earlier age. The day we visited was a big day for school field trips, as it was during the last week before summer break. Fortunately, the expansive grounds left plenty of room for everyone. Resigned to the eventual French conquest of his country, Chiu Juk channeled his energies into this complex. A lover, not a fighter, though he was infertile, he never produced a direct heir despite having over 100 concubines. 2 years after his death, the rest of Vietnam fell to the French. The heart of Nguyen Imperial Vietnam was, of course, the Imperial City, modeled after the Forbidden City in Beijing, China, and covering 160 hectares, almost 400 acres. It was the seat of absolute imperial power for 80 years. For our visit to the most traditional site in Hue, we decided to take traditional Cello transports. But what used to be a cheap mode of transportation is now double the price of a taxi for each of us. But it was an enjoyable, relaxed ride. At least most of the time. And we were glad that Hue traffic was pretty light. And that it was early in the morning, as there would be no shade from the intense afternoon sun later. As we approached the city, the scale of its 8 kilometers of perimeter ramparts really came into perspective. In between the ramparts and the palace, the flowered and tree-lined green areas are welcoming to the millions of tourists who come to Hue every year. And, as with our Cellos, many of them had gone traditional for their visit. It looked like these students were here for some kind of pre-prom or graduation event. Within the Imperial City, the Imperial Palace, or Purple Forbidden City, is the primary attraction. At its 19th century peak, it contained 160 buildings, including royal palaces, temples, gardens, and residences. After the abdication of the last Nguyen Emperor, Bao Dai, in 1945, natural disasters and wars destroyed all but 10 major structures. Reconstruction only began in the late 1990s after the city, along with the imperial tombs, was made a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The best way to tour the site is with a private English guide that you hire at the main gate. We arrived too late for that, but a self-guided English audio tour was available. A very good second option. The main palace complex was destroyed by fire in 1947 during the Indochina War between Vietnamese revolutionaries and the French, and is still under a lot of reconstruction. For over 2,000 years, the Vietnamese warred with, were occupied by, and traded with various dynasties of Imperial China. That has left indelible influences on their culture. The Vietnamese education and government systems were based on Chinese Confucianism, and until the late 19th century, Vietnamese writing was in Chinese characters. The Vietnamese imperial symbolism and architecture was also heavily influenced. Like the Chinese dragon as a symbol of the emperor, and another Chinese symbol were these giant bronze cauldrons. They were Chinese imperial symbols of a heavenly mandate to rule. The Nguyen lords had these cast in the 17th century, symbolizing their ambitions. They are now Vietnamese national treasures. Another Chinese influence is Penzai, which became bonsai in Japan. In Vietnam, the sculpted trees are popular, but they also love creating miniature landscapes. Han Non Bo means a set of mountains and islands, and ones in the Purple Forbidden City are gorgeous. "70 years of French occupation also had influence on Vietnam. The baguette for the banh mi sandwich is the most common, but French was also a governmental language during the colonial period, and the modern Vietnamese script was adopted by the French and became standard in the early 20th century. The last emperor, Bao Dai, was a Francophile who played tennis and built his palace in a very European style. Our few days in Hue was too short, but our exploration of Vietnam continues north to the capital of Hanoi. Hit the like, subscribe, and bell buttons so you don't miss our upcoming episodes.